Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here today because we are unpacking a truly fascinating study by researchers Kay Colin Lee and Lisa Kiang. We spend a ton of time in our society talking about the harm that prejudice causes, but today we're going to look at a hidden emotional toll. We're looking at the consequences of prejudice when it comes from within your very own community. I really want you to just sit with this profound question for a second. What is it like when you are not accepted by your own people? It's a pretty heavy thought, right? Most of us know the sting of being rejected by outsiders, but there's this unique, almost invisible pain when the door is shut by the people you thought were on your side. And that is exactly the mystery we are about to unpack. So let's start with section 1, the pain of rejection. Okay, let's dive into this. To truly grasp the weight of this research, we need to step into the shoes of the participants. The researchers set up this very specific, carefully crafted scenario. Imagine this. It's your first Friday at a brand new job. You're packing up for the day, and you overhear some of your colleagues talking about grabbing dinner at this newly open restaurant. Hoping to, make some friends, you gather your courage, walk over, and ask if you can join them. And then they subtly reject you. They just kind of brush you off. It's a complete gut punch, right? Keep that visceral feeling of being left out in your mind because it really anchors all the academic theories we're about to explore. Moving on to section 2, Ingroup versus Outgroup Prejudice. Before we reveal how the participants reacted to that rejection, we really need to frame this study with two core psychological concepts. The first is outgroup prejudice. Basically, this is preconceived attitudes or discrimination coming from a group to which you do not belong. When we read the news or talk about societal discrimination, this is almost always the type of prejudice we're talking about. It's expected, and unfortunately, it's quite common. But then we have in-group prejudice. This is preconceived attitudes or discrimination perpetrated by members who share your very own identity, your own people. This is a silent but absolutely potent force. It often goes under-discussed because, honestly, it's uncomfortable. Theory suggests that marginalized groups might distance themselves from their own peers to align with a dominant group, or they might reject someone for just not fitting a certain cultural mold. And we know this phenomenon is real because it's grounded in rigorous scientific research. The study we're analyzing today was peer-reviewed and published by the Asian American Psychological Association. So that gives us an incredibly solid, academically sound window into how these dynamics literally play out in the real world. Which brings us to section 3, the restaurant rejection experiment. So how do you actually measure this kind of pain? Well, the researchers recruited a sample size of 241 Asian American young adults. Each of these participants was asked to read that exact same imagined restaurant rejection scenario that we just walked through. But here is where the experiment gets absolutely brilliant. They used a split condition design. Half of the participants read that the colleagues rejecting them were also Asian, so they're in-group peers. The other half read that the colleagues rejecting them were white, out-group peers. The subtle prejudice they experienced was word for word identical. The only variable that changed was the identity of the perpetrators. Section 4, a surprising attitude shift. The data that came back from this is just eye-opening. Remember how subtle the prejudice was? The colleagues look at each other and say, well, we don't think you'll be interested in the place we're going tonight, maybe next time. It's incredibly dismissive. Now, what the researchers found was that the initial negative emotions, feeling upset, distressed, angry, were actually roughly the same for both groups. But when they measured the participants' general attitudes toward the groups involved, the whole story changed dramatically. Now, what's really interesting about this is the stark drop in the numbers. Before the experiment, participants had a baseline warm, positive attitude toward their Asian peers, scoring an average of 7.43 out of 10. But after experiencing that subtle rejection from their own in-group, that score dropped significantly to 7.12. Take a second to really absorb that. Experiencing in-group prejudice caused a statistically significant drop in positive attitudes toward their very own group. It actively eroded their baseline warmth. But look at the total contrast here. For the participants who were rejected by white outgroup peers, their baseline attitudes toward white people barely moved at all. It effectively flatlined, going from a 5.87 to a 5.90. So prejudice from the outgroup didn't meaningfully change how they felt about the outgroup as a whole. So why does prejudice from your own people damage your outlook so much more? The researchers point to a few psychological theories. The biggest one is expectancy violations theory. Simply put, we naturally expect loyalty, support, and solidarity from our own people. When you anticipate acceptance and instead you're handed a rejection, it produces a much worse psychological outcome than if you expected nothing at all. To put it bluntly, it feels like the ultimate betrayal. Let's look at Section 5, the American identity factor. Of course, human behavior is almost never one size fits all, right? The researchers wanted to dig deeper into the nuance of this data, just to see if different generational backgrounds responded differently. And this brilliantly illustrates what they found. They split the data between US-born and foreign-born Asian Americans. It turns out that significant drop in positive attitudes toward the in-group, it was driven almost entirely by the US-born participants. The researchers suggest that for US-born individuals, the pan-ethnic Asian American identity might be held more centrally as a core part of who they are. And because that identity is so central, an in-group betrayal stings that much more, whereas foreign-born individuals might not place the exact same weight on that specific shared identity label. Finally, Section 6. Why this matters today. So, we've looked at the data, the psychology, the whole shebang, but let's connect these academic findings back to the real world because this absolutely matters for you and me. The researchers state this perfectly in their conclusion. It is critical to continue to focus on factors that can promote pan-ethnic Asian unity and mitigate within-group conflicts. When we truly understand that in-group prejudice has this unique power to lower our warmth toward our own people, we realize just how dangerous it is for our collective well-being. Building strong, unified communities means we absolutely have to recognize and stop the subtle ways we might be alienating our own. Which brings us to the end of our explainer. And I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. Think about the spaces where you belong. How do you treat members of your own communities? And what happens when they look to you for acceptance? Do you validate their belonging, or do you subtly close the door? The invisible weight of in-group loyalty is incredibly real, and as we've seen today, the consequences of breaking it are profound. Thank you so much for joining me to explore this crucial topic. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll see you in the next explainer.